And welcome back to another episode of the Real Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jacob O'Connor. Real Conversations is a podcast for those dedicated to doing hard things and living a meaningful life. This week, I'm doing a solo episode, coming off the high of having the co-founder of Under Armour on the podcast last week. I thoroughly enjoyed that episode. I think it delivered a lot of value. I've had one of my listeners tell me that he's listened to that episode 4 times over again. And I just think it's so cool that, something that I started in my bedroom 6 years ago, you guys are getting value out of. And that is like the most rewarding feeling ever. So if you guys haven't checked out that episode that I released last week, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. If you guys are new to the podcast, I do ask that you share the podcast with 1 or 2 friends if you get any sort of value out of it. I don't run any sort of ads. I don't make any money off the podcast. This has been a passion project where I really do just try and provide as much value as I can to you guys, the listener. And in return, I just ask that you share the show with someone. Seeing the show grow means that the impact of it grows, and that is a very significant feeling, a very rewarding feeling for myself. This week's episode is going to be a pretty short one, but it is something that I wanted to talk about because it's a term that I'll often use on the podcast. It's a concept that I'll often reference on the podcast, and I want to make sure that I'm able to kind of articulate that in a way that makes sense to you guys, so that you understand it moving forward in the future. Maybe provide me with feedback of what it means to you. But I think that it's something good to be thinking about if it's not something you've considered prior. And the concept that I'm going to be discussing today is the idea of building. You'll often hear like someone say, I want to build a life. And they'll maybe mean that in terms of a relationship with a significant other. You can mean that in many different domains of your life. It can be your relationship with a significant other. It could be your spirituality. It could be your fitness. It could be business. But this idea of building is something that is so attractive because it means that you're willing to accept the current position that you're in right now isn't where you want to remain for the rest of your life. The idea of building means that you can aspire to something greater than what you currently are and what you currently have. And the idea of building requires a vision. And a vision has to be something that's compelling enough that you're going to be willing to put in the action. You're going to be willing to put in the effort, the time, and the sacrifice to get that outcome, that reward that you're looking for, that life that you're aspiring to. And I think that's super cool because I often talk about the sacrifice of the present for the future, and I often talk about compounding. Both those concepts work in perfectly to the idea of crafting a vision that is compelling enough that you're willing to build and work towards it. So all of that pertains directly to this idea of building that we're discussing here today. And my favorite conversations are ones that are about building. Like I just came out of one with John, another gentleman that's built just an absolutely massive restaurant group. And I walk out of those conversations and I'm so inspired because when you look at what they've been able to build, what they've been able to create over decades, it is remarkable. And someone like John and myself who have one restaurant right now, and we're working towards opening up a second one. I've had the podcast for the last 6 years. I've got the honey business. Like all of these things are at the ground stage. They're ground zero. We're just getting started. Like you've taken the first step, which is really difficult. But ultimately, we have these grandiose ambitions. We have this really compelling vision for what we're trying to build over the course of our lives. And it's going to take a ton of work. But when you come out of a conversation with someone who kind of widens your awareness for what is possible for yourself, and they also reassure you that what you're doing is possible, you guys are on the right path. When you get those words of affirmation, it just makes building so much more, it just makes everything so much more exciting. And that's why I love talking about building. That's why I think it's great for you guys to be thinking about, where am I currently at in my life? Where is my fitness at? Where is my health at? Where are my relationships at? Where is my business career? Where's my business or career at? And thinking, if I were to want better for myself, what would that look like? What would I need to do? What would be compelling enough that I would actually be willing to do the work required to make those types of things happen in my life so that you could live that life? And just this idea of going from one restaurant and trying to get a second one, then trying to grow, then trying to incorporate real estate, and then trying to do all these other things that we have laid out over this long, long time horizon. All of that is building. And building is great because another term I'll commonly use that I've taken from Jordan Peterson is this idea of aiming up. And when you think about a line graph with an XY axis, and you have a line that goes up and to the right, like that is aiming up. You are in one position, and it may not be the position you want to be in, but if you are aiming up and to the right, then that means that your trajectory is such that you will end up in a better place than where you currently are in the future, as long as you're doing the work that's required. And that work often requires creating a detailed, compelling vision and then adding in effort and consistency. Because that effort needs to be sustained over a long enough time horizon to where those future benefits that are out there 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, they require quite an upfront investment. And that's what this period of my life is. And for a lot of you guys that are listening, and that you guys are around my age, or at least you have the aspiration of building something over a long time horizon like I do. And so knowing that this is the investment right now, this time in our life is the investment that we're hoping and we're betting will yield the result that we want down the road in the future. And so knowing that we're all doing this together, where there's a group of multiple people, a community of people that are trying to build something that is aiming up into the right, us coming together and having that shared mentality, that shared thought process, even if we're not trying to build the same exact vision as each other, that energy is infectious. That's why coming out of the meeting that I just came out of, I feel so fired up and so inspired, because they're still aiming up. They're still trying to work towards an even more compelling vision of where they're at. That energy is infectious. And so I'm feeling it right now, and it's fueling me up to continue to work hard and to work towards my vision of what John and I are trying to accomplish. And if you are currently in a stage where you're not feeling motivated, you're kind of questioning why you're doing the things you're doing, you're just going through the motions, I would challenge you to sit there and think, what do I really want out of life? Like, if I were to remove the limitations of what I could accomplish, what would I actually really want? What do I really desire to build? What do I want for myself and for my family and for generations to come? And I think you can craft something that's really compelling, something that will really get you up in the morning. And then when you surround yourself with people that are also building, that are working towards these outcomes in their life, a rising tide lifts all boats. Like, you start to feel this energy together, and you guys start to bounce ideas off each other, and you start to support each other. And then your friendship grows into something deeper, but it's something where you guys are all rising at the same time. They say you're the average of 5 people you spend most time with. If all 5 of the people you're spending time with are lazy, they don't go to the gym, they don't have any aspiration for their personal life, they have crappy relationships, that average doesn't look good for you as the 5th person. But if you're surrounding yourself with people that are at your level or higher levels, but both of those categories are aiming up, they're trying to accomplish more than what they currently are at, then that's going to raise you as well. It's going to inspire you. It's going to give you something that you can see, something that's tangible. And so that's why it's so important to have mentors that are slightly above you, that are willing to share insight into their journey and willing to give you feedback on what you're working on as well. That's why this community that's forming around the podcast is so important. This podcast is a community of like-minded individuals that are aiming in an upward direction. And all of us are trying to do super cool things in our lives. And if you're not, I would really challenge you to think about what it is that you want out of life that would make this an extraordinary life. What would you be willing to sacrifice right now to have in the future? What would be so compelling enough that you'd be willing to sacrifice a lot in this current stage of your life? You'd be willing to make this investment so that you could have it in the future. And that to me is such a fun thought process. I love talking with people about this concept of building. I love getting with them, hearing their thoughts, hearing their visions. I love trying to help them. I mean, again, this energy is so infectious, and I love being around people that have a similar mindset to this. So that is what I mean by this idea of building. You can do it in multiple different categories of your life. But I think it's super important to consider, and it is something that came up a lot in the previous podcast, come up in a lot of previous episodes that I've done in general, and it's one that I would really challenge you guys to think deeply about. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you guys are building. If you have any questions you'd like me to clarify, if you have any challenging thoughts for me as well, I'm always open to feedback. But this is something that I think is super important, just this idea of building. And I really hope you guys will consider it. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. I'll be back again next week. You can find me on Instagram at Jacob O'Connor. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Have a good one.